right, I think we're going to get started. Thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Vanessa Cardenas and I am a consultant with Emily's List. And I wanna introduce my co-presenter today, Natalie Cohn. Natalie, do you wanna introduce yourself?
Yes, hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Natalie Cohn. I am the Director of Community Engagement for Emily's List. And we're so excited about this training and so excited that you can join us. I will be in the chat and I encourage you all to let us know who you are and where you're from. We definitely want to hear you and want today to be interactive. So if you haven't already, please place your name and your location in the chat.
Great. Thank you, Natalie. Yes, we know that everybody by now is super busy with sort of Zoom calls, so we're going to try to make this as fun as possible. But for those of you who don't know, Emily's List is a political action committee that was founded 30 years ago. And in sort of those years, it is one of the most influential political action committees. And its goal is to elect as many women as possible, pro-choice Democratic women, up and down the ballot. And Emily's List has supported hundreds of candidates for state and local office, as well as dozens at the federal level, including luminaries like Speaker Pelosi, Senator Kamala Harris, now a vice presidential nominee, and candidate, and Senator Catherine Cortez Masto, Representative Lucy Macbeth, and we could go on and on and on. So I encourage you to check out emilyslist.org just to learn more about the organization and the amazing influence it has had on politics over the years, but also in terms of seeing the candidates that Emily's List has supported. We're here today because we want to make sure that we are sort of harnessing the engagement of women in this election cycle. And we know that in the last few years, we have had a lot of success in electing women into office, but we also know we need more. And in particular, we need Latinas to run for office. Latinas only represent about 2% of electeds nationwide. We are the most underrepresented when it comes to elected office, and I'm talking about every level. So the need for our voices and our presence is dire, and we should all be thinking about, you know, what we can do, especially at the local and state level, to change that trend. So with that, let's get started. Please put, if you have not done so, like Natalie mentioned, please introduce yourself in the chat, your name, your pronouns, and you know, where you're from will be great. And as we go through the slides, please put in your questions in the chat and we'll try to address them. We'll try to address as many of them as possible. With that, let's get started. So here's our agenda for today's webinar. We are going to be covering a couple of areas. This is actually a 4-hour training. So we are just going to be giving you a 3,000 feet overview of some of the basics. And then we will share some resources at the end so you can continue with your learning. But today we're going to talk about taking the first steps in your process of running for office. We're going to also do a little bit of thinking and just learning about how to effectively tell your story, which is a key piece of anyone running for office. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the questions that you should consider and research before you actually run. And then we'll do some Q&A. So in terms of webinar norms, these are the basic rules. Please invest in our time together. You will get out what you put in. I know it's really hard. It's 5 o'clock, and I'm sure you have been in two or three or four Zoom webinars today. So I know it's a long day, but try to just focus as much as possible. All questions are welcome. All questions are valid. Please go ahead and put them in the chat and we will try to address them as time goes by. And then the last thing I would say is, you know, the slides are internal. This is a webinar for women, developed by women and with women in mind. And Emily's List has invested a lot of time to make sure to give our women the edge. So please try to keep this information internal. And we also want to value the people that are actually taking the time to be with us and just really invest that time, right? So let's try to keep this information for ourselves. All right, so the first question that I want to ask is, what do you think are the must-haves for progressive women to run for office? We all know that we need more women to run, but what are the qualities or what are the requirements that you think a woman who's running for office should have? And you can put them on the chat, and maybe Natalie, you can share some of those with me as they come in. And don't be shy, please share. What do you think are the must-haves for women?
We already have some really good ones in here. So we have Christy who suggested money. Lisa said knowledge. We also have Norma who's saying knowledge. Oops, there's so many coming in at one time. Knowledge, experience, empathy, self-confidence is another. Motivation to serve. I love that one. Someone said degree. That would be interesting to hear. You talk about that, Vanessa, as well as someone a well-educated person. We also have a long-term plan, vision, the ability to raise money, fortitude, empathy, commitment to community, desire, thick skin, and then knowledge of the issues that affect women and their families. And I think these are all really excellent ones. Some of them are ones that we hear very often. And then there are some that we think we should have, but oftentimes we really don't. So with that, Vanessa, do you want to talk a little bit more?
Yeah, and I think, again, you guys are pros. You already covered a lot of the things that we want to talk about. Yes, integrity. We want to have people with integrity in public office. It's elected officials are role models. They hold public trust, and we want to make sure that we are electing people that have integrity to be able to be able to perform in positions of power and to have the trust of the community. So integrity is a key piece. Passion, someone named passion already, and this is absolutely true because you're gonna have to convince a lot of people to vote for you, and you need to have that passion. You have to communicate to have that passion, and you also have to communicate it. So that's an important characteristic of someone running for office. Motivation, 100%. Running for office is tough work. You have to wake up early and do a lot of meetings and be out there showing your passion to the public and absorb a lot of information and learn a lot. So you have to have the motivation to actually go through the day-to-day, as well as to, as you get closer to election day, there's just more and more things that come up. So you need to be motivated to perform. Commitment, again, commitment to your community, commitment to yourself that you're making, so taking this step, right? So just really, I think it's a key piece of someone who's running for office. The next, nobody mentioned this one, but I think this is so important that you have to like people. You don't have to love people, but you have to kind of like them, right? We all know, or I have experiences, for example, with a teacher that doesn't like kids, right? And politics is a very social sort of job, right? You have to always be talking to your constituents. You have to be engaging with other electeds. You have to be talking to press. So you really have to enjoy meeting and being with people. That does not mean that you have to be an extrovert. And in fact, we have some examples of really amazing introverts like Stacey Abrams, and this is how she herself describes herself. But you have to enjoy just sort of being part of sort of the process and interacting with folks, etc. You have to have a willingness to learn. And this is so important. Nobody expects you to know everything, but you have to be able to just at least be humble enough to know that there are things that you don't know, and you're gonna have to learn it along the way. Whether that is how campaigns work, and listen to your staff, or learning about an issue that you might not have a lot of depth on, or even learning new things about issues that you think you might know a lot about, right? It's a different perspective and willingness to learn.
Vanessa, I can jump in too.
Mhm.
You mentioned the willingness to learn. I remember in the comments, some folks mentioned that you should be well educated and you need a degree. I think some of those things can depend on the position that you're running for, but generally, you don't necessarily have to have those things. Like the point that you just made, the willingness to learn is what's most important.
Yes, and I was going to get to that, but that's a great reminder, Natalie, because I think there is this perception that you have to have a bachelor's degree or you have to have sort of like an advanced degree, and you don't. There's no requirement for education, formal education level. I think that at the end of the day, voters are trying to elect someone who really relates to them and understands their issue. Of course, they want someone who has intellectual curiosity and is able to speak on the issues that they care about, but there's no formal training or education required to run for office. And this is particularly true at the state and local level. So willingness to ask for help. Again, another really important characteristic, and this goes to what I said earlier about that nobody expects you to know everything, but you also sort of have to have just recognize that there are things that you're going to have to learn as you go.
And Vanessa, there, a lot of folks I noticed had been putting in the comments, like must be willing to raise money, and money was a lot of folks. And I wonder if you think that like really fits into the willingness to ask for help bucket.
Yes, and we're going to talk a little bit about that further down the slides, but you don't have to have all the money in the world, or you don't have to have a lot of money to run. Well, depends on your race. But my point is that nobody has to come at this sort of being a pro at fundraising. Everybody learns and you can learn, but you have to be willing to be able to learn, right? You have to have that flexibility to be, you know, in a space where you're going to have to pick up the phone and ask for money. And I know that the fundraising piece, every time we mention it, like people want to get in like the fetal position and say, no, we don't want to do this, right? Because we are not used to asking. First of all, we're not used to asking for help. And we really, especially for women of color, I think, you know, we really do not want to ask people for money. But fundraising is a piece of running for office, and it is something that you're going to have to get good at, and everybody can get good at it and better at it, but you have to sort of have that willingness to put yourself out there. And it's also part of, you know, you communicating your passion and convincing people to support you. At the end of the day, that's what it is. And you need to be able to communicate that to voters and get people energized so that they're able to contribute to your campaign. Having said that, money does not buy love. And there's a lot of people who have lost a lot of races, who had a lot of money, but they have the love of the community. So, you know, think about that and just know that as long as you are doing the things that you need to do and that you're leaning in and that you are, you know, sort of learning as you go and just being open to learning, you can get a lot of the skills that you need to win. And then somebody I know mentioned skin that can thicken. Mm-hmm. I cannot reinforce this enough, particularly for women. And first of all, politics is a contact sport and there's no way around it. But doesn't matter who you are, you know, politics is a rough place to just be part of. But it's also incredibly meaningful. And there's just the influence that you can have as an elected is just incredible, and you can actually improve people's lives. So in my view, it's worth it, but it's also important to recognize that it is a contact sport, and particularly for women. And I think, you know, the best example of this has, of course, been Hillary and sort of sexism that she faced and sort of all the comments and just how society has a different standard for women. And that's just a reality of the game, right? But I think that things are getting better, and I think that more women are recognizing the double standard and calling it out, and that's really important. But it is really important for us to know that we have to just have thick skin and just, you know, move on and just project sort of the qualities that we want to project out there.
Vanessa, someone did have a question about one of the things that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to know a little bit more about integrity and wondered if you could simplify integrity. one thing that I just want to jump in and add about integrity doesn't mean that you have to be a perfect person and that you've never made mistakes. We're all human. We've all made mistakes. But I think there's something important about, owning up to the mistakes that you've made and the lessons that you've learned, and the willingness to change or do differently. And I think that's a very important part of integrity. So that doesn't mean just because you've had a past that you shouldn't run for office.
Yes. I'm so glad that you bring that up, Natalie, because yes, I think for me, integrity means honesty and that you are trustworthy. Those are really key pieces. Does that mean that you have to be perfect? No. Like, how many of you have never made a mistake in your life? I know I cannot see you, but probably nobody's raising their hand, right? So we've all made mistakes, we've all, gone through sort of our 20s and teens and all of that. So, but to Natalie's point, I think it's really important to just show growth, and whatever it is, whatever things you have gone through, is to be able to own it and show that you have learned from it, right? But at the end of the day, in the vision that you present, in sort of the person that you become or you want to be as when you're elected, voters do want to see someone who has integrity, who has honesty, who's trustworthy. Those are important pieces of it. If things have happened in the past, you have to be able to talk about those things in an honest way and how you have grown. And you need to be able to communicate how, those lessons actually make you a better candidate, or they're going to make you a better elected. All right, we're going to move on unless there's other pressing questions. All right, we're going to move a little bit faster because I think we are running behind. So just to reiterate what I've said already, we need more progressive women to run for office. They're needed at every single level of office, and particularly Latinas. All right, so taking the first steps, you and your story. As you think about running for office, there's one question that it's going to be asked of you again and again. And the question is going to be, why are you running? Which is why one of the first advice we give to women is to just really think about this question. What is the motivator? What keeps you up at night? What is the passion that you can articulate that will explain why you are deciding to run for office? That is at the crux of this question, and that is why you should take some time on a Saturday or when no one is bothering you, maybe like super early in the morning, and start writing that down. Because when you answer this question, when you're asked this question, you need to be able to articulate what is really the motivator for you wanting to be out there and be elected and ask the support of so many people that, that you're gonna want to have their support, right? So this question is really key to ensuring that, you're able to sort of communicate the reason of you taking the step. So here's additional questions only you can answer, right? Why do you want to run? What do you offer to voters? And do you have the discipline and the drive to win? And then the question that we already talked a little bit about, are you willing to raise the money that's necessary to win, right? And then what seat do you want to run for and why? And we're going to talk a little bit about this later, but when I was doing trainings at Emily's List before, when, we could actually meet in person, I would go to all these rooms and a lot of women, they would tell me, oh, I want to run for Congress. And I was like, that's great. But do you know how much it costs to run for Congress in your district? Right? Because that's sort of what sometimes people have in mind. They just see members of Congress and they want to run for Congress. And one of the things that we encourage you is, yes, there are times when that's sort of the right race for you, but you should also think about other seats because for one, they're cheaper than running a congressional race. And secondly, it's actually a really great preparation ground for you to have higher office. So as you think about these questions, it's really important for you to really think about, okay, what level do I want to run at? What are the opportunities in terms of the seats that are going to be open? And then just do a little bit more research about the types of positions that you're interested in. So these are some of the basic questions that we encourage you to just really think about as you explore when do you want to run and why do you want to run. Natalie, I don't know if you have anything to add to this.
No, I agree with everything that you said. It's just very important to know your why. And when you're thinking about what seat you want to run for, it connects back to your why. What is the thing that you ultimately want to do and accomplish? And that will align with the seat that you might choose to run for. If you care about education, maybe the position for you isn't city council, maybe the position for you is school board. So those are important things to consider.
And this also goes to your passions, right? What are you passionate about? If education, for example, is your passion, then maybe you should think about the school board. If health is your passion, maybe there's a commission of some sort of that focuses on health. So, think about just the options that are out there and think about the pipeline. Actually, Emily's List invests a lot in the pipeline. And what that means is that we want women across all the different sort of opportunities. Why? For two reasons. One, because it's really great training ground for higher office, but two, local office is actually where you can actually directly impact people's lives. So if you're thinking about, okay, where can I have the most impact? It's actually at the local and state level. So you really need to be thinking broadly about the kinds of things that you want to do or that you might be interested in. All right, I'm going to hurry up here because I know that we're almost getting to 5:30. So another really, really important point is whether this is the right time to run for you. And this speaks to sort of your preparedness, whether you're ready for it, whether it's the right time. Do you have a family support system? And when we say family, it can be obviously your close family, or it could be your chosen family, your extended family. But you are going to need support. Nobody can do this alone, okay? And I know that many of us, all of you are juggling and are Wonder Women, but you cannot do this alone. You need someone to help you walk your dog, someone who's gonna help you pick up your kids, someone who's gonna make dinner at night, because you're just not gonna be able to do everything. And if you, for example, own your own business, how that's gonna be handled. So these are some tough questions that you need to think about to figure out whether now is the time to run, or whether it's gonna be in 2 years or in 5 years. So you create your own timeline. But these are key questions. Do you have a job right now? Is your job going to allow you to run for office? Are you going to have to take a leave of absence? What are your personal finances looking like? How the running for office is going to affect you if you're going to cut your job hours? So those are really important considerations that you have to think about before taking the plunge. And then what happens if you get elected? And I heard a funny story when we were doing some of these trainings of women who run for office and they thought, and they won, but they didn't realize that they were going to have to move to the state capital. Okay, so it happens, right? So there's going to be changes in terms of maybe that's going to affect where you live, the hours that you're going to be available, and it's going to affect your family, without a doubt. So these are some of the things that you really need to think about and also research before you decide to run. And also, this will also help you think about the kinds of different positions that you might be interested in, depending of what kind of changes those positions require for your lifestyle. Do you have any questions, Natalie, or are we good?
We do. We have 2 questions quickly coming in from Facebook. So the first question is, how do you keep your passion to run for office alive?
That's a great question. I think what I would say to that is when you see the change that you can make, or when you see the inspiration that you provide for others. And I think for me, like last night here in Kamala Harris, up on that stage, it was just so inspirational. Someone who has a similar story like I have. She's the daughter of immigrants. She, has so many firsts. And she is such a, you know, hardworking and smart and professional. So, you know, when I think when you see people like that, it inspires you. So I think that's one thing. And then the second piece is, again, the impact you can have in people's lives, right? When you're able to pass that piece of legislation that really helps your community, when you are able to successfully advocate for a family or a community, and you're able to see the impact of your work. So I think those are really powerful ways to just give you the fuel to keep on going. And I think most electeds also recognize, you know, that progress, it's not instant, right? It takes time, but that we are all part of sort of that progress. And if we're able to make a tiny change, and then the next person makes another tiny change, and so on and so forth, we collectively are going to make change for the better that's going to be long lasting.
Thanks, Vanessa. You have one other question, sorry, quickly, that is, what is the most effective way to do research when running for office?
Yes, we're going to cover research in a second. So let's, I actually have a couple of slides on that one. I want to talk a little bit about the power of the personal story, because this is actually a key piece of women running for office. When you're running for office, there are three things that you're going to need to have on hand. One is your stump speech, which normally is going to be 5 to 7 minutes, which pretty much is your theory of change. It's sort of your platform. It's what you know, the reason why you're running and why you think you'll be a great candidate. And it's something that you give at every, you know, gathering where where you're going to be asking for votes. The second sort of piece of communication that you're going to need to have is sort of your elevator pitch. And that's sort of your 1 minute, this is who I am and this is why you need to support me kind of speech that you are probably going to need to give to supporters, you know, in a very short time. The reason we focus on the third type of sort of presentation, it's because it's so important and so powerful, and it can be so powerful. And that's the personal story, because this is your introduction to the audience about who you are and why you're running. And, you know, the other good questions that we talked about in the very beginning of the presentation about why you're running, sort of, you know, what's your motivation and so on and so forth. Those questions fit into this, right? So this is why those questions are so important. So that you can articulate the why, you know, why are you running? And normally this personal story needs to be no more than 3 minutes. And I'm gonna ask you a question and see if you guys can answer in the chat really quickly. What do you think is the average attention span of a person, of an adult person? And people, I'm sure people hopefully are putting it on the chat. What do you think is the average attention span of someone? And do not Google it. Are folks writing or no?
Yes, we have a huge range. We have 30 seconds, 40 seconds, we have 1 minute, 7 seconds, all the way to 15 minutes. So we have quite a diverse...
Quite the range, okay.
Yeah.
So I think the 30-second range is actually correct, right? Because now we have these, right? And everybody gets distracted. And if you guys don't connect with the audience sort of in the first 10 to 15 seconds of your talk, it's gone, right? So that's why you really need to really hone in on your personal story and make it short and sweet. If you have something more than that, it's just really, it doesn't, you know, it doesn't really grab the audience. So that's why we spend so much time in our trainings, and we're going to attempt to do a little bit of that here. But that's why it's so important for you to keep those times in mind. You know, 1 minute elevator speech, 3 minutes for your personal story, 5 to 7 minutes max for your stamp speech, okay? So the power of your, the personal story has pretty much these components. What we call this the formula. It's your story, but it's not just about you. It's connecting it to your community and to the issues that your community cares about. And here's where you're trying to bridge that gap between yourself and how you and your story are really connected to the concerns that your community has. And that combination just really fuels your purpose or the reason why you're wanting to run for office. So this is sort of like an attempt to show you in a graphic what we mean when we say what the personal story should incorporate. A good personal story has these three components. It's relatable, meaning anyone can relate to it, whether they're Black, white, Latino, you know, from like upper class, middle class, etc. It's relatable. It's like a human connection. It's compelling, meaning, you know, it's unique, it's inspirational. And I think the most important piece is that it's authentic. And I think in the last, again, since 2018, with all the women that we have seen running for office, they have been successful because they're so authentic. They're really who they are, and they're just putting themselves out there. When you think about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or you think about Ayanna Pressley, or, you know, Lucy McBath, or Veronica Escobar, these are really authentic women who just bring their whole selves to the space. And I think that's something that we all should keep in mind. Now, I definitely want to say this here. This is not easy. You know, it's not easy to put yourself out there. It's not easy to share something deeply personal. It's not easy to just show, you know, the mistakes that you have made, or you know, or even the passions that you have, because it's exposing something deeply important to you. But it is important so that voters understand why they should support you, right? They need to know, they need to look into your heart. Running for office is not just like a mind thing, right? You can have all the numbers and all the data and all the facts, but people also vote with their hearts. And the attempt on the personal story is that you just connect at a very personal level. And people vote for folks, not just because, again, of the ideas they bring, but also because of the feelings they have, how that person makes you feel. We're human, and that's just, you know, who we are and how we work. So we want to just make sure that you keep this in mind as you think about your personal story. So these are sort of the components of what we believe a good personal story is. It talks about a situation, and it could be a situation in any of these areas or more areas if you have any more. You know, it can speak about a financial challenge, about an experience around immigration, or something that happened in terms of healthcare, or a challenge that you had on education. So it just takes sort of a situation to sort of open up a story. It speaks about sort of the reaction that you had to that situation, you know, sort of whether it was that you felt angry, or you felt inspired, or you felt helpless or scared. And the thing is, like, most people stop here, right? They just have this situation that happened to them. They have the reaction. But what separates you from everybody else, and what separates most people who run for office, is this next piece, which is the result, right? Because people who run for office mostly are doers. They're actually leaders in the community. They are people who actually took action after something happened to them. So as you are sharing your personal story, you have to also say that to folks, you know, how this situation led you to take an action, right? Because it shows that you've actually taken some steps to address what happened. And then the last piece is an ask. And this is super important. When you run for office, you always have to have an ask, whether it's ask for money, whether it's asking for votes, asking for people to go knock on doors for you or something, but you should always, always have an ask. And the last piece, and this is pretty much communications 101, your personal story should be really wrapped into values, right? At the end of the day, what we all aspire to is just the values that we hold dear. And that could be values of inclusion, tolerance, of the American dream, of hard work, of optimism. But those values, when we talk about, you know, what's relatable to people, are those values, right? Truth, justice, fairness. Those are some of the values that we all as Americans agree to, that they're part of our social contract, and you should be able to incorporate some of those values in your personal story. Now, I know this sounds super complicated, but trust me, it's doable. We're gonna show you an example of a really good personal story. No personal, I mean, again, these are some guidelines for you. Like you don't have to go down a checklist and do all of these things, but we definitely want you to keep thinking about all of these things as you think about what's a compelling way to communicate who you are to voters. So I'm sure you have some questions. Let's see if you have questions first before we go to the video.
Yes, we had a few questions when it came to personal story. There was a question about, how do you tell a compelling story if you feel like your story is boring? So someone mentioned, like, if you come from, just a maybe traditional middle class suburban family, like how do you communicate in a way that's effective or that people can connect to?
It's funny because I get that question a lot in the trainings. And I like to tell you the story that Jennifer Palmieri, who used to be my boss and who became communications director, told me about Hillary Clinton. And she said to me, well, she was just not telling me that story. She was just sharing that story with a group of folks, that when Hillary was running, they were having this same conversation about, her personal story, that Hillary was like, I don't have a compelling story. I'm just like a normal person with a normal family. And, Barack has a great story, like Bill has a great story. And that kind of just shocked me, right? Like someone as accomplished and, someone as amazing as Hillary didn't think she had a compelling story. But I think that just goes to show that women in general, we don't think that our stories are important or compelling. But I can assure you that every person has a different story, and every story is unique. And as long as you're speaking from the heart, and as long as you are talking about your passion and what motivates you and what steps you have taken to make change, those are compelling. And as long as you are driven by values, the values that I mentioned earlier, it is compelling because it speaks to universal values that we all aspire as people. So I know this is hard, but I would encourage you to just start writing your story, like why do you feel like you want to make the change? And I also want to say to you, when you decide to run first of all, there are not a lot of people who want to run for office. It's a select few. It's like, putting yourself out there and saying, you know what, I want to take the time and spend some of my money and dedicate all this time to this cause and just take all the, all the bad things that come with it, and just putting yourself out there is powerful. Just that by itself is powerful because there are not many people who are doing that. So I think just sort of remembering that and going back to sort of that, what makes you want to do this is really important, and it's compelling. All right, let's, should we watch the video?
Yes, that sounds good.
I'm going to stop sharing so Natalie can share her screen.
All right, can you see my screen?
Yes.
I came to this country as a single mother, looking for opportunities for my oldest daughter. I'm originally from Peru. I came just with a high school diploma, and I never imagined that education and professional opportunities will become available to me. Like many other immigrants, I juggled 3 jobs just to be able to afford a 1-bedroom apartment. I've always worked full-time while I went to school and raised my family. And today I have 2 master's degrees, one in public administration, a second master's degree in social work. My experiences in this country have assured me that it's important to stand up and protect the American dream. That's why I'm running for office. When I moved here, I didn't have that much money to pay for rent. So when I see now, many years later, that the minimum living wage in Virginia is still $7.25, and we are living in one of the wealthiest states in the country, and seeing parents that are actually in my district are still having 2 jobs or 3 jobs to make ends meet, and they have to decide in between food and family, that takes me back many years ago. I want parents to make more money so they don't need to have 3 jobs, and they can spend more time with their children so their children can succeed as they grow up. When Hillary lost and my son came after school telling me that we need to leave this country because the president doesn't like people who speak Spanish, I said I had to stay in this race, because not only my children, but children who look like them, that they could look up to me and say they belong here, living in a safe place where everybody is welcome and respected, regardless of how you look or where do you come from. That is the American dream. The people in the 31st district, they deserve an advocate that will fight for them. My name is Elizabeth Guzman, and I'm running to become your delegate in the 31st district.
That was great. So what did you guys think about that, that video? Any thoughts or reactions? Did she communicate her story in a compelling way? All right, Natalie, you.
Yes, they were slowly coming in. Yes, definitely. Some have said that it was inspirational. It was awesome. Did you all see any of the elements that Vanessa highlighted show up in the story?
Yeah, let us know if you saw some of those elements and what did you think of it. But I think, again, this is, Delegate Elizabeth Guzman, who came in to into the Virginia State Assembly. Again, one of the women that came into office in the 2018 wave. But you know, she has a very compelling story, and she was really able to articulate it. All right, I'm gonna move quickly because I see we're at 5:47 and we still have a bunch of slides to go through. One of the things, you know, always read the room when you are giving a speech and make sure that you're practicing, but really understanding your audience and reading the room and practicing is really key. All right, so somebody asked earlier about the research piece, and this is really, really important. As you think about what races you want to engage in, it's really important to actually answer these questions. You know, what types of seats are available and when is the seat open? What's the history of the seat of the district? You know, what are the demographics of that seat? Has that changed in the last year or the last couple of years? Any other changes? And this next question is really key. How does your profile fit the race and the place? Especially now that districts are going through such huge demographic change, it's really important to think about that. I am not sharing anything new when I say that most of elected bodies are not diverse and are not representative of the communities that they serve. So there is a hunger right now and a need to have more diversity, both in terms of gender, race, ethnicity, and so on and so forth. So as you think about the seat that you are interested in, think about sort of the changes and how your profile fits that. And then think about other elections that may impact yours. You know, for example, a presidential election always has higher turnout, which means that even local and state candidates get more attention, right? So those are some of the things that you should think about. You have to know the facts about the race. What are the applicable election laws? How do you get on the ballot? I mean, we've heard so many stories of women not being able to get on the ballot because they missed the deadline, right? So basic things that knowing the deadline is really important. Is there a primary, right? So, and what are the rules around the primary? And also, how many people have voted in previous elections, how many, what's the turnout that you expect, and, what is your win number, and so on and so forth. Delegate Guzman is a really great example of like a really grassroots organizer. She was so successful and just really knocking on doors and reaching out to voters, but she put in the time, and she just was really smart about using sort of her grassroots organizing skills to really get to voters. And that's part of sort of also understanding the community that you are running in.
Vanessa, you had a quick question, just wondering about who should do the research, whether it should be the candidate or like whether staff should do it.
Okay, well, if you can afford staff, I think that's great. But I feel like these are basic questions that any candidate should know before they run a race. These are, again, basic questions that actually will help you decide when, where, and how you should run. So it's great to have staff, but I would imagine that most folks are not going to have staff until they're able to raise money. So those are things that you need to just think about. Now, everybody always asks me about how much it's going to cost. And that varies wildly depending on what race, what seat, where you live, and so on and so forth. So you can find information about sort of, how much a race normally is based on sort of past experience. And here's some resources in terms of where you can find that stuff. The Department of Elections for your state or your city or your district, it's a good place to start. Their website, Ballotpedia, and again, it's another great place where you can learn a lot about stuff. You can Google things nowadays. The Department of Elections, the campaign finance reports. There's a lot of information online. And of course, if you have staff that can do this for you, that's great. But again, these are just some pointers of where you can just get that information. Natalie, I don't know if you have anything to add on here, but.
No, I agree with everything.
Oh, great. Right. The other thing I really want to encourage you is to just really put yourself under a microscope and doing your own self-research. And this goes also to the question earlier about integrity and people who are worried about something they might have done in the past. And as I said earlier, you don't have to be perfect, but you have to be prepared. And we all know about all these crazy stories, right? That people who run for office and then get elected and then something happens. Here are some examples, right? Dr. Price, he was what, the HHS secretary, I remember, and he, or somebody he hired bought stock, right? And he was testifying in Congress, so that came up. This other piece from the Washington Post, a Virginia law license of an attorney general was suspended, right? Here he is a candidate for attorney general and his law license was suspended, right? And then this other article from the Daily Beast, this is actually a Republican lawmaker who had created this really anti-woman website and just was part of this sexist, misogynist sort of network and was posting stuff online. So it's really important to just Google yourself. First of all, create Google alerts for you so that you understand what's out there about you. For example, I have been in DC for a long time and I've worked in different spaces and I have written a lot of opinion pieces, policy papers, and so on and so forth. For example, I would need to do my research, just making sure that I review the papers that are written, the op-eds that are written, just to see what's out there. There's a lot of video of people nowadays online, things that you posted on Facebook, things that at the time might have seemed like, oh, this is kind of fun. But now looking back, you're like, oh, maybe that was not the right thing to post at that time, right? So again, it's important not for you to rewrite history, but mainly so that you're prepared and you know what's going to come down to you if somebody else is trying to amplify something negative about you. And it's just part of basic, again, opposition research that you should do for yourself and about yourself.
Vanessa, there are two general questions about the research process. One person wants to know how long before the election should you start this process? And then I'll just share the second question as well for time, which is how can you get a list of the people who voted in the last election you're running for?
So there's voting lists. There's a system that's called the VAN system that once you are running for office and you're sort of connected to like your local democratic sort of machinery, you're going to be able to have access to that. So there's sort of just that information out there. In terms of how long before you run for office, you should, I would start now. I mean, if you're thinking about running for office now, I would just do it as soon as you can. One, because it gives you the time to do it. And this is something that you can actually, again, do right away. It's not like you don't have to wait for anything to happen. And then again, it's just more like a backward looking thing from this moment and seeing the things that are out there that might be damaging. And if you have a lot of things out there, whether it's on social media, whether it's, you know, things that you have written in the past, that you have posted in the past, then it gives you the time to actually, if there's like, again, video about you out there, then it gives you the opportunity and the time to just go through it all and not be rushed. And again, it also gives you the opportunity to identify those things that you might think are just not great or that might raise a flag so that you can actually create a plan to respond to it. All right, so financial, personal, and public life, your professional experience, your civic engagement, make sure that you're careful about looking at sort of the organizations that you were part of. And I'm thinking here, like, I don't know, sometimes people that, I'm thinking, this probably happened just many years ago, but for example, like country clubs sometimes before did not allow people of color to be part of it. And then sometimes you have candidates who might have been members of that, right? So it's just an example of kinds of things that might come up that you don't even think of, but that actually might get press attention, or people might try to use it in the wrong way. So just think about the groups that you have been members of and so on. And if there are people in those groups that might have, have some issues, and you being associated with them would not be a good thing. And again, you also have to think about your family, right? Like, close family members and sort of their associations. And unfortunately, it's just something, again, going back to like politics is a contact sport, and people are going to try to dig things out. So it's just really important to be aware. And this does not mean that you are going to be disqualified. Again, the whole purpose of this is for you to be prepared and are able to sort of answer questions about it. Build investments that are in your name. And this is really particularly important for women because, again, sometimes, we have joint accounts with family members, with significant others, just to make sure that everything is where it should be. That you pay taxes, of course, still super important for voters to make sure that we have covered our financial obligations. And this last one, I cannot stress enough, social media commentary, essays, photos. You really have to go back to that and see, okay, if I am someone who's looking at this just from the outside, what does this post say, right? So you have to just be really cognizant of that and how other people that might try to do something negative might see it or might use it. So really important to just review that. If you can, delete it, but knowing that, you just have to be ready for it and respond. So here's a few just suggestions. Scrub your social media. Anything that you can should be taken down. Thorough internet research of your name. And these are actually some proactive things that you can do, is reserve or buy a domain name. That's actually very easy to do. So for example, I can go out online and buy vanessacardenas.com, right? So I can own it. A strategy that's very much used in political spaces is to buy your opponent's domain name, because then you just fill that page up with negative information about that person. So this is always something really good to do. And it's like $15 a year or something super affordable. Setting up Google Alerts, updating your LinkedIn are also really important pieces to just make sure that you are, you are active out there. And then start posting content that really supports your brand, and think about your brand, right? Think about the kind of persona you want to project, and just being more out there and writing blogs, letter to the editor, op-eds, things like that, that really speak to the issues that you care about. All right, I think we're at the hour now. And I hope this was all helpful. I know that this is very, very fast. So Natalie, I don't know if there are any burning questions or any other flags.
If we have time for just one question, we have a pretty good question that just came in that's very relevant to this moment. The question is, how can you run a very effective virtual campaign that closely replicates the traditional landscape, meaning in-person rallies, fundraising, events, and others?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that, we're definitely living this moment right now. I think that this is a moment for innovation. And I think that the advice that I give is that now more than ever, you really have to speak to the concerns that the community has, because for people to spend their time to go into a Zoom or a webinar or something, it really needs to be compelling. And the only way they're going to do that is that if you really speak into sort of the issues and the concerns that they have day to day, right? So really speaking, just really, I think, being aware of the context in which those communities or your targeted community is operating under during these times. I think on the fundraising piece is hard, but I also feel like, again, people can be innovative. And, if before you were holding $50 fundraisers, $100 fundraisers, now it's probably, a good idea to start with a lower threshold, just to make sure that you are bringing different folks in. I think that you have to be creative in terms of the people that you are profiling or the people that are hosting some of these events for you. So it's not the usual suspects. I think nowadays, again, people are looking for just different voices and different faces and different, especially younger folks, people that are just more in community. So those are sort of some of the key folks that I would engage in some of these events. And hopefully, if at some point people can go outside again following, I think communicating the kind of leader that you are, meaning following the social distancing rules, making sure that people have protective equipment, and sort of engaging in that way, and I think can also be effective. But without a doubt, we're seeing this right now at the national level with how Biden is running for office, right? There cannot be rallies. The convention was suspended. The in-person convention was suspended. So I think that it's a different time. At the same time, I think, one of the things that, for example, we saw this week with the convention is like presenting, things digitally and presenting diversity and just profiling, community leaders that are super grounded on sort of the issues that they care about, are things that are still very compelling and people wanna, take the time to listen to and be part of. So I think creating those moments and being creative about it is very key. Okay, so I think we've covered a lot very quickly. I wanted to end talking to you about two resources. Emily's List has a training center online where what we just presented is there. So we encourage you to check it out. We also have a Facebook page. It's called Run to Win. So you should please feel free to be a member of that group. And I want to recommend a book that I love. It's called The Well-Spoken Woman. And it's pretty much my Bible. And Chris Janke is just an amazing author. And she's been a speaking coach for a lot of elected office, a lot of women who run for elected office. So I really recommend her book. Again, it's called The Well-Spoken Woman. And there's an updated version, I think from last year, The Well-Spoken Woman Speaks Out. So I really recommend those resources for you, and please be in touch with us. And I hope this was helpful. Natalie, I don't know if you have any last recommendations for folks.
I'm sorry, it's muted. I love all the recommendations that you made. Again, folks, the training center from Emily's List has a ton of resources, including this training. I know that we didn't get to touch all of your questions, but promise you a lot of the answers to them will be in the training center. So I'll include that link in the chat and encourage you all to check that out. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Great, thank you. And I just added the author's name to the chat. Her name's Chris Janke, and encourage you to check out her book. But thank you so much, and please be in touch, and we hope to see you again at some point.